everyone. Welcome to the Around the Ballpark podcast. My name is Mike Redmond alongside my co-host Darren Redmond. Today we're going to talk Miami Marlins baseball, among some other things. And with us tonight, we have Eli Sussman. You might know him from at Fish on First and at Marlin Spaces. And Eli, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks to both of you guys, Darren and Mike. This should be a good time.
Looking forward to it.
Definitely. And before we get into everything that we're going to speak about, Darren, do you have a few words for our listeners?
Attention, Palm Bay and everyone else. You have tax troubles? Listen, Nashville Tax Solutions has got you covered. Whether you're behind on returns, facing a lien, or you just need expert advice, their team is ready to help. Here's what some clients have told me and told us. Chris Bennett and his team have saved me from a financial nightmare. They're knowledgeable, clear, and compassionate. So don't let taxes stress you out. Reach out to Nashville Tax Solutions today. Call 615-502-2250 and visit NashvilleTaxSolutions.com or email info@NashvilleTaxSolutions.com. Nashville Tax Solutions, where tax resolution is achieved.
Yes, thank you, Darren. And again, thank you to Chris Bennett and Nashville Tax Solutions. We've had Chris on our show before. It was great having him on. I'm sure we'll have him on again. So right now, continue doing what you're doing, listening to this podcast. But first thing tomorrow morning, if you need to, reach out to the folks over there at Nashville Tax Solutions. They'll get you covered. So Eli, thanks for being on with us tonight. If you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing with those watching, listening along a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am the founder of Fish on First. I spend way too much time covering the Miami Marlins and all aspects of it. Thankfully, we're speaking on an off day, much needed off day from the suffering that sometimes comes with covering this team. But I get immense satisfaction and fulfillment out of doing it. And so myself and my team at Fish on First, we cover the Marlins as thoroughly as anybody out there all throughout the year and across all aspects of the organization. So you can find us fishonfirst.com. You can find Fish on First across social media, where we just do a wide variety of content, from writing every single day to live streaming before every single Marlins series, recording our own podcasts. And it's an exciting time of year regardless, as finally the trade deadline is kind of within view. And when you have a team that is so clearly defined as to where they're going to fall on the buyer-seller spectrum, it makes it a little easier on my part to plan out exactly how we're going to cover it and analyze the way things go. But yeah, and if anybody there happens to live in South Florida, you'll find my staff covering those games in person as credentialed media in the press box and in the clubhouses, and occasionally on the road as well. We're actually reaching a portion of the schedule where we're doing a lot of road trips. So even on road Marlins games, coming up in Philly, and then in Tampa Bay and Cincinnati, all those over the next month and a half, I'm sending my guys out there to do it as well. So yeah, even regardless of what their record is, we're very passionate about covering all things Marlins.
That's outstanding. And there's so many teams. So obviously right now we're sitting here, the date is June 20th. There's so many teams in the National League outside of the Colorado Rockies and Miami Marlins that are still in the hunt, which is a little bit unusual, and not only in the hunt, but so close. It's so jam-packed together. But you have a team like the Marlins sitting currently, I believe, at 25-49 as of the date of this recording. So not exactly where they want it to be by any means or stretch of the imagination. So with it said, right now, one thing I wanted to kind of get into first a little bit with that division, speak on, you're not facing the division as often as we have in years past, where, you had mentioned traveling to some new stadiums. And I always love to see things like that, where it's like Marlins first time visiting, this park in 5 years. I love seeing those kinds of things. That division right now, as it stands, obviously, it's not in reach for the Marlins this year, but what are your, just kind of on the outside perspective, what are your thoughts on the National League East this year? Surprising that you have a team that's 7 games ahead of everybody else and not the team you might have thought it might be. But just like to get your thoughts on that.
Right. Yeah, you have to start with the Phillies because they've been a very good team each of the last 2 years, but from the very jump, they've really left no doubt about themselves this season. Everything is clicking for them in terms of they have a bunch of stars on their roster that are basically all performing up to their contracts. And then they just have all these other unheralded guys that are playing better than ever. So yeah, it would take a while just to go through everybody on their roster that's really been excelling, even the ones they like bitty role players they weren't counting on stepping up. It's just an extremely complete team. As you noted, it's a pretty big cushion at this point, even as early as it is. It's hard to imagine them not winning the division. And that's notable just because the Braves have done it 6 straight years entering this season. So that'd be a notable changing of the guard, at least during the regular season. And the Phillies have beaten the Braves in the postseason now a couple of times. So they'll have they're going to be fascinating. The expectations there probably couldn't be any higher at this point for a team that got close to breaking through the last couple of years, but still hasn't won a World Series since 2008. Then you have to go to the Mets just because of the roller coaster that they've been on. I don't know if there's a single team in baseball that's been as inconsistent as them, and it delivered them, as you touched on. They are one of the many teams that are in that crowded middle as a result. And I don't think people were saying that a week and a half ago that thought they were trending towards being one of the defined sellers. And maybe they still are just because of how inconsistent they've been. But that's a team that I think a lot of people pegged for being around 500 entering the year. And that's where they are right now. So they're just one of them, and the Nationals are both those teams that are going to probably have to go pretty close to July 30th to determine whether they want to be buyers or sellers. And then you have the Marlins, which are, they're the perfect inverse of the Phillies, because from the very start of the season, they've left no doubt that they are out of it. They started the year on a 9-game losing streak, which was unprecedented for them as a franchise at the start of the year, and just hasn't got a whole lot better. There've been little moments of there've been some moments of joy. It's not going to be an all-time terrible team, but it is one where it's just very clear that the pieces don't fit together the way that they envisioned coming into the season. And it's frustrating for the fan base, just because they've been through very similar circumstances before, where one of the few times they make it to the postseason, immediately the next year, they're seemingly on a different track. All of a sudden, it doesn't seem, well, it felt like they might be entering a window of being competitive consistently. And all of a sudden that window is slammed shut, kind of whether a little bit of bad luck and a little bit of just their own organizational decision that they want to prioritize the long term over trying to optimize what their chances in 2024. So yeah, it is unfortunately familiar for the team. And it's been fascinating to cover that, just because of the big contrast in vibes from one year to the next. And we're not even halfway through, and it already is just so clear that it's not going to be like 2023 was.
Right. And Darren, I'd love to get your opinion on this, and then Eli as well. You mentioned, so in terms of the fan attendance, obviously we know where they stand in terms of attendance compared to the rest of the league, but the experience. So one of the guests that we had on our podcast a few weeks back, David Cummings, lifelong Cleveland Guardians fan. And so he was mentioning he went to the game pretty recently, and about 80% of the fans in attendance, at least to his recollection, were Guardians fans for that. Are you seeing any more increase of that this year in terms of, and then Darren as well, to kind of that experience of when you're going to a park and the home team is pretty much it feels like they're the road team, so to speak, because there's more fans of the team that's coming in than there are the team that's there. So your thoughts on that, because that's something, Tampa Bay's experience for many, many years, but Miami seems to be the one place where there is a lot of that going on.
Yeah, there has been, and I think they're probably a little bit more this year than even last year for obvious reasons. Part of it is just a victim of positive circumstances. They're in a place that a lot of visiting fan bases want to travel to, and where perhaps some people have already relocated to there, even if their original fandoms were somewhere else. Having visiting fan bases who now live in South Florida and take that opportunity to see their original love, the original team in person when they come down. Yeah, that's to be expected at this point. And we're at a point where there's just not a whole lot of Marlins star power for people to get attached to. I think there's something to be said for having those like recognizable faces on the roster that attract people to come in every single game. And at this point, they have Jazz Chisholm Jr. and as their center fielder, and he's a really energetic player to watch, and he contributes in so many different ways. And he's kind of alone in that aspect. Aside from him, it's a lot of nobodies players that just aren't very established. Their pitching staff is what they really hung their hat on the last few years, and their pitching staff has been ravaged by injuries. So even though they have the just 2 years ago, the Cy Young Award winner in Sandy Alcantara, he's out for the year with his elbow surgery, and the up and coming emerging superstar pitcher they had, Yuri Perez, same surgery for him with Tommy John. So he's out for the entire season. You don't even have those type of guys every 5 days that could bring in an extra boost of people that want to see them be dominant on the mound. And that's, yeah, so it's unsurprising, and they're kind of used to it at this point. Part of that is also just being still a relatively young franchise. If you're 31 years old, feels like a while, but unless you've had like really sustained success, it takes a while for fandom to pass generationally from fathers to sons, for grandparents to their children, their grandchildren. Yeah, it sometimes just takes time for that to work. And yeah, but ultimately winning is going to be the biggest factor. And outside of last year, there's just been so little winning recently, especially since they've moved to this new ballpark in 2012. So it's unsurprising, and you get used to it at this point, even though yeah, it would be, the atmosphere would be a whole lot different if you had more people that were pulling for the home team.
There's so much for me to unpack there. And there's some questions I want to ask down the road about covering the team professionally with credentials. But before that, I take a little bit of a different spin. And that is everything right now for the next, up to next week and a half, has an asterisk. There is a fundamental explosion of pride going on right now with the Florida Panthers. So if you're going to go hang out with a buddy, are you going to watch the Marlins, or are you going to stay at home or go someplace else, go get a libation somewhere? And are you going to watch your team go back to the Stanley Cup and as one win away? So I think all of that right now is a little bit of an asterisk. I think everything you say, Eli's right on time, but it's made a little bit worse. So who's going to be left in the stadium? Non-Miami, Marlin fans. It just so, and that's totally understandable. I mean, I love my Mets, and if I lived in New York and the Rangers were having a good run as they did, I'm watching the Rangers. I'm sorry, I just am. I think that's what's going on. I think everything else you said has full merit. But I also think that we talked a little bit about this one time before, I believe. I would market the heck out of the Marlins as a Davey. This is a long history of Davey. They go out there and they beat the Yankees. They go out there, and they win World Series with just gumption and getting it done. And that's a wonderful legacy that they've built already. Can't take that away from them, I mean, let's be honest, Yankees went into that World Series, whenever that was, thinking that, hey, we lost. Happened. But I think the run with the Florida Panthers is also affecting attendance.
Yeah, when we're recording this right before Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals, where the Panthers have a chance to clinch. So that is even on my own staff, everybody has not just one eye on the Panthers, but probably both eyes on the Panthers right now until this run is complete.
Yeah, that's true. The Edmonton's not going down easy, down 3-0. They've not only won these last two games, but significant amount of goals scored in each game as well. So so one of the things, trying to identify, you mentioned, right on, they went 0-9 right off the bat. One guy now, the guy I'm going to mention, Trevor Rogers. So we're kind of looking at the starting rotation for the Miami Marlins. So here's a guy with a record that you look at. Now, you weren't expecting much, but to see that record be what it is, with some of the names they have in their rotation, from an outside perspective, from someone that may not watch Marlin games on the regular, is it more of do they have more of a pitching problem, or do they have more of an offensive problem? Because even looking at the names in the lineup, I'm like, it kind of looks 7 deep, where I'm like, okay, there should be some production here. Maybe not a lot of stars, like you said. But what is their biggest need for now? I know personally, but those that may not know, what is their biggest need this year? Is it the pitching because of the injuries that they've had, or is it the lineup not having enough stars?
Their biggest need every year since they started their previous rebuild has been getting more offense somehow. Since they broke up that dream outfield of Stanton and Yelich and Ozuna, they they've never put together anything close to even an average offense, which makes it remarkable that they made it to the postseason in both 2020 and 2023, even with questions about how they're going to score runs. And maybe that's part of the reason why they've put themselves in this situation right now, is because they realize we can't just, it's not going to work that well every single year unless we dig deep and find out why they can't develop their own hitters. And it has been, yeah, such a huge issue for them throughout this entire sequence. In a year like this, to achieve a record such as theirs, where they're on pace for 107 losses, things are going wrong everywhere. Things are going wrong both hitting and pitching, and especially fielding. They're one of the worst defensive teams. So I would say that is one reason why the pitching stats probably look worse than they actually should be, is because they really do struggle defensively at almost every spot that they've had this year. That adds up, even if it especially in close games, a lot of close games that they were winning last year, not so much are going their way this year. It really is on the hitting side. One of the guys that more so than anybody else that was keeping that offense afloat last year was Luis Ariz. He did everything they could have wanted in 2023. And as everybody took notice of, the first big trade of this season was at this point now a month and a half ago, sending him to the Padres. And yeah, without him, they've actually, as a team, they've been playing a little bit better. But I don't think that speaks anything ill of Ariz. It's more to say that there was nowhere for them to go but up. But they miss him a lot, and it was a very contentious topic about why trade him at all. He's only 27 years old, as experienced as he is. It was just that perfect combination where even if you were looking at some lean years coming up in 2025 and 2026, give him a contract extension and like build around him. So there was, a lot of back and forth about keeping him around. Without him, the offense is just even more inconsistent. I think they've been shut out. I'll have to count off the top of my head about 8 times this year. They've been held scoreless. And the guys like him, they are what I call their floor raisers. When he's in your lineup and he's batting leadoff and he's getting up 4 or 5 times every single game, it's really hard to get shut out. There's always something going on. You're going to have scoring opportunities. And the difference this year compared to 2023 is that they just don't have a lot of guys at all that collect hits, period. And if you're not getting there, it's a bad combination of bad hitters that are also undisciplined and don't draw their walks. Just not enough scoring threats, period, for this team. And unfortunately, even looking at the upper levels of the minor league system, guys that are knocking on the door, there's not a single guy that you look at there and really trust to be an everyday player for you. It's pretty far away. And that's why we expect there to be further trades leading up to the end of July that are going to bring in some exciting hitting prospects that they can eventually build around, because over the last few years, they just have not really cracked the code or put together the front office, the player development system that produces these homegrown guys. They've had high draft picks, and those guys just do not develop the way that they were projected to. And they really needed a shakeup, and there's been this big shakeup in personnel. And so now it's just fingers crossed that this combination brings better results in order for them to like build from within, because they just were not doing that. They were constantly looking for hitters, and at this moment they one of the weakest lineups in the league.
And you mentioned too with the prospects, while we're on that topic, the top prospect that they received from that trade as well, for Luis, I believe is now injured for a significant amount of time, correct?
Yeah, that was outfielder Dylan Head. He was just a 2023 draft pick, only 19 years old, fresh out of high school. And they received 4 players in return and 3 actual interesting hitting prospects, but he was the top one that you could squint and see a long-term everyday outfielder eventually. And what made it just very bizarre is that he was hurt before the trade. He left a game on May 2nd with an injury. And then on May 4th, 2 days later, they complete the trade. He comes over he's hurt, so he doesn't even play for the first week and a half after the deal. Then he returns to the field, looks good for a couple of games, but apparently aggravates that injury to his left hip. And like I, I understood the timing of the trade from the Padres' perspective, where they're trying to compete this year. They want as many games out of Arise as possible, and they probably wanted to turn the page on this hitter, Dylan Head. Maybe they knew something that the Marlins didn't about the severity of his injury, but I still then and still don't now understand why it is the Marlins felt so rushed into making that trade when it's so important that you get it right. And so he still has a long future ahead of him. It is the name of the surgery is like too complicated for me to pronounce, but it's been explained to me that it's something that should not linger with him beyond 2024. I don't know about that, but it's apparently he'll be fully recovered by the end of the summer and then have a like a normal off season in order to get ready for 2025 and beyond. But the optics are still just awful that you make this trade of such a critical player and you're not seeing any positive returns from that trade so far. So people are being asked to be patient with that, but the optics are just, they could not be any worse.
Hey, Mike, who was the New York Met who won the Cy Young in 2012, 2013, ended up going to Toronto? Knuckleballer. He was great.
Oh, Dickey.
Dickey. So, when we were sharing, we were doing a little, pre-conversation before we started to record, I thought of him in this situation because he did this wonderful documentary one time, how he was ready to be signed, top draft pick, this and that, the whole thing. And I think I'm going to mispronounce the nerve, the Ula nerve, I think, right in the elbow. It wasn't that it was strained. Turned out he didn't have one. He was born without one. Remember the story, Mike? And
Yes.
and so nobody took a shot at him. And everybody said, why would you sign him, Mets? And he goes on and wins a Cy Young, because he adapted and threw a knuckleball. So my hope is that this gentleman with a head with the hip injury can heal and provide something really good for the Marlins. So here's my question I have for you. You mentioned you have credentials, and people who don't have credentials, I don't want to sound like, oh, you don't get behind the red velvet rope. There's a lot that goes into that, a lot. And you hold on to those, not like, look what I have. You take care of that with reverence. For example, you may see things, you don't report on it. There's just subtle little things that are very, very important. And there's an unwritten rule. How long did it take you to feel? I know you have to say right away, maybe, but it took me, because I got my press credentials first in college sports in Fresno State, and then with hockey, professional hockey. That first time you sit up there, well, how long did it take you to say, well, I do belong here? It took me a while. It took me a couple of weeks at least. Because at first, the first game, I could only speak for myself. I'm like, wow, I'm here. I'm here, and wow, this is kind of cool. How long did it take you?
Yeah, a couple of years, I would
Right.
say, partly because another complication, we're an online only outlet. And
Mhm.
when you think of credentialed media, you think of what they call legacy outlets,
Right.
newspapers and TV and radio. And honestly, even 5-6 years ago, when I was going through the process of both applying for Marlins games, but also for other teams, um, it wasn't even a consensus across Major League Baseball to allow online only publications. Like some of them were still not. They still had this very traditional way of thinking, and I don't know if I wouldn't really blame them at all,
No, is this
but
an old paradigm?
yeah, but it can be difficult to
Mhm.
break through to some people and like to try to explain that we're trying to do the exact same thing. We're trying to cover the team in this way and trying to get present these stories and also come up with analysis that furthers the fans' understanding of the game and their interest in what's going on here. And yeah, so it was a process just to make sure that just to get accepted by the teams themselves, and then yeah, and even some of our colleagues that are from those
Right.
legacy areas. And as you alluded to, even being sure that you're doing that you understand what are some unwritten rules about being inside these private spaces and understanding what you can use and what you just, and also just to remind yourself that these are just people too, that
100%.
are that when they're off the field, they're doing things for their personal lives that really that's nobody else's business. And if you happen to be in that private space because the rules let you be, that doesn't mean like actually invading their privacy. So it's, yeah, it takes a while to really feel your way through all that, for sure.
So I'll tell you the two times that it really struck me, and this might resonate with you as well. And for those of you who are up and comers and bring forth, okay, the first time was I was covering San Jose, and the person that works with the media tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Do you want to speak with the manager with the head coach? And what players would you like to speak to?" And tell you, I thought I was talking to somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, and the second time, the name escapes me. I'm struggling. I am at a Fresno Grizzlies game, and the person who does the play-by-play and does media relations work, the team we were playing, one of their coaches hit a game-winning home run for San Francisco Giants in the playoffs against the Phillies, and he said, "Hey, would you want to do a interview with him?" And I was like, "Thank you very much." And you have to be ready, right? You have to be prepared. No gotcha questions, people. No gotcha questions. They don't work. And you know what? You're going to be one and done. And just bring forth your best. That's all I would say. What was your moment where you're like, "Wow, I belong"?
Um, that's a good question. Exact moment. It was maybe it was actually during spring training where because flying down to Jupiter where the
Mhm.
Marlins hold their stuff, the media presence there was even lighter than it usually is for these particular games. And was I guess it must have been with this I referenced him before. He's the top young pitcher in this organization, Yuri Perez. And this is
Mhm.
when one, two, I guess it was 3 years ago. Or
Mhm.
no, just 2 years ago, entering 2022, where he had just like established himself as this hotshot prospect. And he had gone from being anonymous to being somebody that was now being kind of tabbed as a future star of the league. And he just got done. This was often in their spring training facilities where they have like a dozen different baseball fields and a dozen different mounds to warm up. And he had just thrown like a bullpen session. And yeah, he was just kind of walking aimlessly after getting through this exercise. And yeah, I'm the only one there, but
Mhm.
I hadn't gotten a chance to speak with him before. I hadn't gotten a chance to see him in person before. And he in particular is somewhat of an intimidating presence just because he's 6'8". He's one of the taller guys in all professional baseball. But at the same time, you get closer to him, and he's this 19-year-old with this really goofy smile, and
Mhm.
he sees me and he recognizes our coverage. He recognizes the logo of our website, and
Mhm.
as somebody that has followed us from afar as well. And to be able to speak with him about like what he was working on during spring training, just one on one in that private moment, um, and yeah, it helped to have somebody that was familiar with who I was, but at the same time,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
That's a
that
weird
that kind of
feeling.
yeah, that kind of interaction was yeah, really special. And being able to cover, you can't really help it, but when you're in these people's personal spaces, um, you kind of pull for them a little bit harder just
Of
to be
course.
sure that they achieve that. Well, most importantly, that they stay healthy and they have an opportunity to have full careers. But a lot of positive interactions. It has even surprised me, the percentage of guys that are cooperative and that recognize what we're trying to do. And even if they
Yes.
Yeah, even if they can, in the back of their minds, the way that most of us go about things, like they can tell that we weren't not even decent athletes in our own right, and that
Right.
we couldn't do what they did. The kind of maturity that a lot of these players have is really impressive.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and one thing I say a lot, I'm fortunate the position that I have and hold dear to my heart. Here at my local church, I'm actually oversee the children's ministry, and it's an outstanding opportunity. Love doing it. One thing I'm a big proponent on is small beginnings. And what you shared there about with Yuri Perez, in that moment, you probably didn't understand the significance of that moment, but then kind of with Darren asking that question, you kind of went there, and that moment really probably propelled, you know, from where that was to where you are now. In that moment, you don't really know how to handle that. Like, oh, that was really cool. This happened. And then you go to the next day and you go about your day and you kind of reflect, the significance of that. It's awesome. I always joke around, because I'll be the first to judge when I see somebody, get an opportunity with media credentials, let's say, and they're like, oh, they get that microphone up to that athlete, and what were you thinking before you went up to the plate and hit that walk-off home run? And it's always the same thing. Oh, I was thinking I left the garage door open. And so I always think to myself, okay, if I had that opportunity, I'm going to ask the real questions. I'm going to ask the juicy stuff. But I wonder in that, if I'm told, okay, this is what you got to ask, this is what you got to ask. Do you feel, with the safe questions versus the real question, do you have any, if you were given certain opportunities to speak with certain people about certain things versus on the record, off the record, what's that like, kind of that fear of maybe asking a question that you don't really want to cross the line and ask versus the safe questions? So I always think that's interesting.
Uh, what I will tell you is the way that I see it and what I talk to my staff a lot about is it's not a contest to ask the best questions, and the objective is to get the best answers. The objective
Yep.
is to get the to try to break through and get as much honesty as possible about these subjects, and to uh, we're trying to serve our audience of fans and like try to get them the kind of insight that they just simply can't get from watching the games from afar. And I like just for that simple principle to guide a lot of those when it's in that kind of formal setting and it's being recorded. And those I think we kind of just touch on the fact that there is the whole different aspect of it where it's not being recorded and it's
Yep.
not in that official capacity. But yeah, it's always about how are we going to arrive at this answer that helps our audience, better understand what happened and better understand who these guys are and what it is that led to the outcomes on the field that we got there. And yeah, always just to keep it in the back of your head that well, I suppose the worst thing that could happen is something that Darren alluded to, that if you do something really inappropriate, you can risk losing your credentials. But
Yep.
usually, the worst thing that can happen with a lot of these routine questions is somebody could say no, or someone can just decline to answer.
Right.
It's really not that bad, as long as what you
Yeah.
asked was somewhat relevant to what's going on. They'll let you back in here, and as a lot of these players will understand like what you've been through. If you, yeah, even if you ask a bad question, or if you get really overly nervous and uncomfortable doing it and it doesn't come out the right way, and you screw up in that one moment, there's, at least in baseball especially, there's so many opportunities to get it right just because there's so many games. So that's probably the other most important thing, just remember that there are other opportunities and you can learn from even mistakes that you make or awkward moments that you have there.
So if I could share something real quick, and again, not giving away any secrets here, and I'm certainly this is not about hubris of myself, but I think Eli, you'll understand this. So I'm talking one time to a member of the Colorado system, A-ball, and he was a bonus baby from college. All right. Nobody knows he has Tourette's. I'm getting emotional talking about it. And he wanted to interview, but he was so nervous. And when we were done with the interview, he says, "Boy, you made that seem easy." And it wasn't, trust me, it was all him. And Eli, you know what I'm saying, right? You know, so when you have somebody, it could be a language barrier, it could be Tourette's, it could be they had a bad day. When you kind of walk that line properly and help them, and whether that's interpreter, whether that's just framing the question so the answers could benefit our followers, but not in any way make them look in a way that they don't want to look because they got to protect their own brand, right? Eli, I mean, maybe you want to talk a little bit to that.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. Absolutely. And also having that on your part and on anybody else in that position, having that awareness that when the athlete itself is a little uncomfortable or um, somewhat inexperienced in answering certain questions, yeah, you need to be sensitive to that, put them in a position to actually get across what they're trying to get across. And because it is when you have somebody in that position, it could be, I guess there's a temptation to take advantage of it to
Oh
create
yeah.
the content that um people will find interesting. But if it's not really what they intended to do, then that's going to hurt you in the long run. And yeah, it's not going to serve you well if thinking selfishly about that. You need to, it's tricky to
Right.
keep the other person's perspective in mind and just be sensitive to what what they're thinking, how they're feeling in that situation.
If I could tell you one thing, just from our conversations that we've had, short interactions, but one thing is they see that smile on your face. Like no one would know that your franchise is in the gutter right now, and that's the reality is. Guess what? They're gonna wake up tomorrow and they're gonna play baseball again. Doesn't matter what the record is right now. They were just in the postseason last season. They could easily be in it next season, and I just love that. There's something to be said about that because you could have conversations with people. I mean, I've been there, done that as a Mets fan, grumpy sometimes, but then I realized like, hey, it could be worse. And they put on a 7-game win streak and all of a sudden they're back in it again. And so that's just something that I think as you continue on, that smile on your face, no matter what, that like Darren was mentioning, they're going to respect that so much. And you're going to have that understanding. Well, you know what? This was a bad day. Maybe I didn't want to speak right now, but it's nothing against you personally. I hold you in high regard. All my interactions with you have been positive. Just today, just really got to me the reality that we're 25 games back and, whatever the case may be. So, so we have about several minutes here left about before we have to go. Just a couple things I wanted to cover quickly. So this is a team that I think we've talked about this in the past, but some may say that they struggle with an identity. I still think when I hear the Marlins, I love the teal. It's always there. One of the short stories I've shared in the past. You can still go to Space Coast Stadium today in 2024. They haven't played a minor league game there in years. And underneath the seats and underneath the armrest is still the teal color that they did not paint over. So I still hold that, near and dear to my heart. Just, I guess for one, because they were so close to where I live, I go to so many games and whatnot. Do you feel like this is a team struggling with an identity, or is it really just all about that the hesitation to pull a trigger on just securing somebody long term, saying, you know what, we may not have a lot of money, but we've got this one guy, he's going to be here for a while, and you can at least wear his jersey without buying. That's got to be a thing too. You got to worry about buying a jersey that the player may not be there in 2 years, with the Marlins especially.
The places where we traveled.
It is such a struggle to establish that identity when there's just so much turnover across all levels of the organization, even from ownership. The current owner, Bruce Sherman, he's been there less than 7 years. And for the first few, he had Derek Jeter as his main baseball person and his CEO, and then he leaves. And in between, they've now had, over those last just handful of years, they've had 3 different GM, president of baseball operation types that have their different philosophies. They had Michael Hill, who for many years with the old ownership, then they moved to Kim Eng for only 3 years, and now Peter Bendix. And so when you have change at that level with the decision makers and what they value and how they evaluate players, And the people that work underneath them, there's a lot of churn there as well with all their assistants and the people under. When there's just so much turnover, it leads to inevitably a lot of roster turnover as well of the players that are actually on the team. It's, yeah, so few guys are left. Well, there's basically nobody left from the previous ownership, and there's hardly anybody left from even 2020, which was the first short season postseason berth that they made. And so when you have all these changing faces, it's almost impossible to have some sort of consistent identity. Yeah, what you began that with is something that is, I think every fan, not every fan, but the vast majority are also yearning for teal to come back as well. It was something distinct, and it was beautiful. And just a year into when this current ownership took over, they rebranded and they went with a new black, red, and blue color scheme that's okay, all things considered, but it's just not distinct. It looks not significantly different from several other major league franchises as well, whereas the teal was something that was distinct to them and something that people could take pride in, and it was what they certainly had when they won those World Series. So now in this particular season, they don't even have teal throwback uniforms available. Last year, just once every couple of weeks, they wore these teal throwbacks, immensely popular. And they even, on the 30th anniversary of the franchise, they made it a point to bring back alumni to the organization. That's part of your identity too. But it seems that they only want to embrace that when it's convenient for them, when it's a certain anniversary that they can make money off of, rather than being something that is really part of what they stand for. In this season, for example, year to year, you just see so few other alumni in attendance. They brought Dontrell Willis in just a couple weeks ago. It was immensely popular. They had this. He said it was his first time being in that stadium since 2016, and
It's
he's
crazy.
Yeah, he's one of the most beloved players in their team's history. And I know he's been a busy guy with his post-playing career. He's been very successful as a broadcaster, but that's just, yeah, it's disappointing that they don't embrace their history a little bit more, as uneven as it has been, in the fact that so many of their key players were also traded during their careers. So few of them actually spent their entire careers with the Marlins. There are complications, but at this point, they don't really embrace that past. And there's not really a coherent vision for what their future is. And so if you're lacking both of those, it does put them in the spot that goes back to one of our earlier discussions about attendance and fans showing up, because they don't know exactly what it is that they're rooting for at this point, when you have a franchise that's in such this major transition now, where it seems like they're going to bottom out before trying to build up yet again.
Yeah. And we just have about 5 minutes left before we got to go. So in that time, I'd love to start with you, Darren. When you think Miami Marlins or you think Florida Marlins, so much history, so many talented ball players. It'd be hard to kind of just identify the cream of the crop, so to speak. But what names, rather than discuss, one of the things we've done before is we've done the whole Mount Rushmore thing, but rather than go that route, just when you hear Marlins, like, who comes to mind in terms of their, because I mean, you could look at some of the stars that they've had on the mound, and it's insane how much talent they've had in just their short. And I agree with you, like 31 short history. But starting with you, Darren, what are those names that are synonymous with Marlin baseball? Because some are still playing that are still playing right now on other teams, but they're still synonymous with the Marlins. So love to hear your thoughts on that.
Haley Ramirez, Stanton, of course, Cabrera, and nobody really brings up Al Leiter enough, but they should.
Yep.
And Pudge. That's it.
Yep. And Eli as well. I mean, I know, you're in it every day, all that stuff, but kind of just looking in the rear view mirror, if you had 5 seconds, someone said, hey, name the names that synonymous with the Marlins, any names that he didn't include there that
the two additional ones, and I agree with most of Darren's picks right there. The two additional ones I'd bring in, Jeff Conine is still known as Mr. Marlin.
100%.
From the very first day of the franchise's existence, he had a big performance on their opening inaugural game. And even now, he is still in an assistant to the owner, an advisor. I think he's an advisor to their owner right now. So it's great that he's still involved with the organization as he has been for a lot of his playing career. Jose Fernandez is the one player that tragically didn't have an opportunity to get traded or leave via free agency just because his life was cut short. During the parts of 4 seasons where he was with the Marlins, he was a total sensation. He, not just his performance, but his mannerisms and his attitude. He Yeah, he really did transcend baseball for that very brief time that he was with us. From 2013 to 2016 is when he was with the Marlins. And yeah, he was just building towards being, I think, one of the great pitchers of his generation. And he's,
Yeah.
even now, he is so fondly remembered for the way that he pitched and the perfect balance that he found between being competitive and being joyful when he was playing baseball.
Yeah, and someone had asked me not too long ago. They said, which pitchers in your lifetime really were just that special? And being a Mets fan, we've been blessed with many great pitchers over the recent years and stuff. But the four that come to mind, even still to this day, to me, in terms of trendsetters, for me, it started with Steven Strasburg, went to Clayton Kershaw, then to Jose Fernandez, and now to Paul Skeens. Those are the four guys that come to mind in terms of like impact that can just be. And I remember watching, when D Gordon hit that leadoff home run, just tearing up. I know they say no crying in baseball, but how could you not in that moment? It was beautiful. It was just so difficult, to hear that news, but just to see the community come together on that day. And it's unfortunate it takes those kind of situations to see that sometimes, especially here in 2024. But just a shame because he would still be, who knows where he would be now with free agency and all that sort of thing. But there was one guy they would have gave that money to. I find it hard to believe that it wouldn't have been him, for sure. So, and then as we kind of wrap up here, the one last thing I just wanted to mention, because of course our channel is around the ballpark. So Eli, if you wouldn't mind just sharing briefly, someone that is looking at, okay, which stadium am I going to go to next? You can kind of identify what is that Lone Depot Park experience for someone that has not been before.
We did fairly bring up already on this pod that the experience is going to be a lot of opposition fans when you are attending a major league game right there. But it's in the home run sculpture. I know there are a lot of people that are confused about this. That famous sculpture that they had right beyond the outfield wall for many years is still around, and it's outside of the ballpark on the plaza for people to view and interact with before the game or after the game if they so wish. It is, if possible, it is ideal to go there when the roof is open, and that is something that is just generally just reserved for the very beginning of the year and the end of the year due to the climate in South Florida, where because of the humidity, the combination of heat and humidity during the middle part of the season where we are in right now, it's automatically closed just to give people the comfort of air conditioning. But especially in April of this year, when the roof is open, I think it really is on the very high end of beautiful settings to watch a baseball game in. It's a more intimate stadium than most of them as well. Just in terms of there's not really a bad seat available over there, and just due to the attendance, there's opportunities to usually move up to a closer seat as the game goes on. So that's another perk of it. Yeah, but it really can be a very beautiful ballpark when the conditions are right, and yeah, when the right energy is there. So yeah, for people that haven't been already, I would target either the beginning of a season or the end of a season when you potentially have that open roof atmosphere going on. Yeah, it is an enjoyable experience overall.
Hey, can I say one other Marlin that I forgot that we did not bring up?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm kidding. No. Charles Johnson, he was to me the first off, I have an affinity for backstops. I just do. It's a tough position to play. You're the field general. I mean, and he was for a bunch of years a gold glove, right? 4 gold gloves in a row. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do, and what a great player. And just wanted to share that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he is someone, especially once the team kind of all, win the World Series and kind of disband or whatever, his name should definitely be synonymous, regardless of how long he was there. It's a different, you have to kind of value the time spent in Miami differently than you would in other
100%.
ballparks, for
100%.
sure. And those of you that have not been to Lone Depot Park, now is your opportunity. I was sharing with Darren off the side yesterday. You can go on SeatGeek tomorrow night to catch the series. I believe they're playing. Is it Seattle Mariners? They're playing tomorrow. $2 tickets start on SeatGeek for that game tomorrow. No excuses. Get there, have a good time, and and all jokes aside, though, like still visit that park. I've been 3 times, and excited to go back. Hopefully, the end of the season can catch a game one more time. But I do enjoy going. Much more preferred than on the other side coast, even though the family's a Rays fan. Do enjoy the Marlins game experience. It is a good time, regardless of where they are in the standings. So, thank you, Eli, so much for jumping on with us.
Thank you so much.
Just honesty, true, 100%. Continued success for you. Please do check out Fish. I'm sorry. Please go ahead and make sure that you do check them out on Fish on First website as well. Articles almost daily, correct? I believe that are put out there. Some good stuff. And, just continue to support them, and just loved having you on. And until next time, everybody, we'll see you around the ballpark.